On this episode of the Women in Money Cafe, we are going to be talking about the nuclear wasteland that can be sharing finances. And listen to this episode and you can move into dreamland nirvana of shared finances. Over to you, Michelle.
I was going to say good morning, but obviously whenever you're listening, it's good morning, good afternoon or good evening. But lovely to be here this morning with Julie and with Emily, so usual cafe team. And we're here to talk about what can be that minefield of sharing finances, which is very different in many, many households. So it'd be interesting to see what we all do, and then maybe we can answer some of the questions from some of you. So first of all, good morning, both ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
Oh, good afternoon or good evening. We do this. I'm going to blame Catherine. She got us off on this, didn't she?
Merry Christmas, Happy Easter, Good Friday.
Hanukkah. Eid.
You can watch this podcast or listen to this podcast at any time of the year. That's the beauty of the podcast.
See, this is what happens when Catherine's not here to look after us. Listeners, if you're wondering, Catherine's absolutely fine. She's just having a couple of weeks off. She'll be back soon to take charge of us. But in the meantime, you're going to have to make do with the riot and chaos that myself, Michelle and Emily can cause.
We can cause a bit of mischief if we want to. But in order to start us off, Julie, I wonder whether you might share your views on sharing finances.
Well, there's my views on sharing finances, and then there's my experience of sharing finances. And oddly enough, it's actually my experience that's more coherent than my views. So my first relationship was with Brian, the husband that we sometimes refer to. And I'm still friends with Brian, even though we're separated. And we met when we were students, so neither of us actually had any money at the time. So just whatever we had was just collectively known as ours. And then once we got jobs, we just carried on that it was just all our money. And I think it's from a really nice place, actually, because at the start, Brian actually had more money than me. And he didn't see the point of him having money and being able to do things and enjoy them if I didn't get to come along too. Which, you know, that's really nice. And so that just kind of set the tone for our relationship with money. And it worked out really well for him. Because there was that short window where Brian earned more than me, but that kind of got eclipsed by the next 20 years because I work in financial services and we get paid well. But it had always just been our money. And it wasn't so much the fact that I was the one that's earning it all that ended up being the problem for me. It was the sense of responsibility that didn't sit well with me because I was always the one that earned more money. And partly the reason it worked out that way is because Brian got cancer very early in our relationship and his earnings never really managed to get back up to where mine were. I think it was while he was ill as well. So I was responsible for making all the money and responsible for organizing all the money. And eventually, 20 years on, I think that really took its toll when I became unwell. So I'm unwell, but I'm still responsible for making all the money and organizing all the money. And on reflection, if we'd been able to talk about it throughout the years and try and split it a little bit more evenly, maybe the relationship wouldn't have ended. So that's that's my first relationship. A second relationship, I'm still trying to figure out how it works. I don't know yet. So I don't have a set method that I know lots of couples have. I guess the only thing I say is I get now how important it is to talk about it.
Yeah. And I think that is key, isn't it? It is key. Communication is so important in a relationship, particularly with money, because it can be the biggest bone of contention in many relationships. So I think in your past experiences guide where you go in the future with this.
Yeah, you know what's really strange? That even though I know it's really good and it's really healthy to talk about money, the first couple of times I did it with Faith, it didn't feel comfortable. Because I didn't realize that I was accidentally set off on the same path and the same pattern that I'd had with Brian. Then I went and trained as a financial coach. I'm like, oh, you don't want to do this again. You need to do it differently. But I haven't quite figured out what differently is yet.
Well, it's nice to have a very sort of pregnant pause of thought there. I think there's just so much here isn't there, that it's just so tied up with emotions and value and how we value ourselves and responsibility. It's all of this stuff. I mean, you think it's just money, but it's not. It's all of this other stuff.
But it's not actually the money though, is it?
No, it's not the money.
Even towards the end of the relationship with Brian, although that weight of responsibility on the money was a thing that was a factor, it was more just me being responsible for everything. And it was just, it's a reflection of other things that are going on in the relationship. But, I played an active part in that, because whatever situation you're in, it's both of you got yourselves there.
Has that lead you to change anything in the future? I know you've obviously, the first conversations that you've had in your second relationship were difficult for you, but what sort of mindset did you start with? Did you sort of think, I do need to change things, or just see how things go?
Well, I think I got to be careful here because Faith listens to the podcast. No, I think probably when we first went into the relationship, I probably went on the same pattern I'd been with Brian. Then I trained as a financial coach, and then I started to realize how I think and feel about money and how that influences things. And it's made me sort of take a step back. And there's a recognition that it would be good for me and it would be good for other people in my life if I learned to do things differently. But that is still very much a work in progress.
I think relationships with money are work in progress, aren't they, really? And
relationships are.
Oh, definitely. So, Emily, in terms of you, how does sharing finances work in your world?
Yeah, so I'm still married to my first husband. Haven't got to the second one yet. So I've only got one real experience of the shared finances situation.
So clearly Emily's husband doesn't listen to the podcast.
So no, luckily he doesn't, hopefully. So I've really only got this experience. And, when we first met, we had very similar roles, earning very similar money. Although he's 6 years older, so his asset base was probably a bit more than mine at that point. But you know what happens? You have children. Somebody's career takes a bit of a back seat for a while, which was obviously mine. Don't know why. I'm not really sure whether I actually agreed to that, whether it just happened. But yeah, and then all of a sudden, I had to leave. I left the city. I took halved my salary probably by going out to the regions, doing regional banking. And I think it didn't quite click with him quite how much my salary was reduced. So whilst we had almost, before children, just sort of split everything down the middle, having children and then taking a big pay cut, I don't think that I was bold enough. Maybe I was too proud, actually, really, to sort of say, actually, I can't afford to be putting in quite so much money into the joint account. And I remember thinking, when I was working in commercial banking, having halved my salary, that literally every penny went, and probably more some months. So yeah, I managed to get myself into a little bit of credit card debt and things because I was just overspending. I was still trying to have a lifestyle. I was still also working all hours and not really being organized in my own head and being mindful about where the money was going. And yeah, just you need time to actually organize your finances if you're a bit disorganized with it. And that never happened. So when I did take redundancy, I was able to sort that all out. I was able to clear debts. I was able to start again. And then luckily, I think then it did twig that to my husband that I really wasn't earning as much as I was in the city. And therefore, then we did manage to apportion a little bit more fairly our joint expenses. But, I remember after I'd had the children, and I remember very much thinking when I went back to work, I absolutely have to go back to work, and I have to go back to proper work and proper money, because, and this is where, I think when or if I ever do financial coaching, which I'm probably the one of us in the cafe that's never done it, I think I might need to do a bit of work around this. But I believe in a relationship that money is power. And that's a weird thing, but that is definitely one of the reasons that sent me back to work after having children. And I do think money is security. Money gives you options, money gives you choices, and allows you to leave a bad relationship if you needed to, and all of that. I'm not sure power is the right word, so I need to sort of...
Is it independence, maybe?
Yeah, independence might be a better word, but I remember distinctly having the word power in my head, and I wanted power.
I just think you're amazingly brave to talk to us about this. And I just wonder if you could go back to you who left the city to go and work in regional banks and took that financial hit and was still trying to operate the joint finances on the same basis. If you could go back and speak to her, what would you say to her?
Don't be proud. And actually, more than that, make him realize the contribution that you're bringing, that isn't just the money.
Yeah.
And like you said before, Julie, it's communication. Everyone should, especially when you have children. I mean, getting married, if you're not going to have children, then you can figure it out, can't you? It's when you have children and then sacrifices that have to be made, that's when you really do need to communicate and have a conversation about what's fair and what everyone's happy with. Yeah.
Right. All right, that's cool. Right, Michelle, you've put me and Emily in the hot chair. I think it's only fair that you dish the dirt on how you've sort of managed joint finances through the years.
Like my story is probably quite similar to yours in that I am on my second husband. And my first relationship, I probably followed very much a pattern that I saw with my parents, in that we shared everything. We had joint bank accounts, joint savings accounts, everything was joint. And at the time, I thought that was working quite well. When the relationship came to an end, there were consequences to that, which led me to feel probably a bit more vulnerable. And I think that vulnerability sort of built up this independence in me, this want to be independent. I needed to be financially independent. I didn't want to be reliant on someone else. And as my husband probably now will tell you, that's been brought with me, and I keep that to account at all times, because I am very much that I'm financially independent. We do both contribute to the bills equally. We haven't in the past, when he was earning less than I was at that time, but now that we sort of a bit more parity, we split the bills, and then we sort of have what's left. But I do actually manage all of it, so that's probably the bit of the control freak in me. But also it's that need for independence, I think.
Yeah, and it seems to be it doesn't seem to be there's many people that do it like sort of the way Brian and I did at the start, where you just chuck it all in together and it's free for all. I know that one of our listeners did get in touch to say that her and her husband did do that, but he left her in charge of all of it. So a bit like me, she was in charge of making sure everything was in the right place at the right time, and it all happened, and she was okay with that. It's just me that wasn't. And but there does seem to be this pattern then emerging as we go into second relationships. Maybe some people do this from the start, that you have the joint account and the joint bills and the joint saving and food, and then everybody has their separate accounts. But it seems that even though that sounds like a simple solution, there's nuances there, because like Emily's told us, when you've got a disparity between earnings, that imbalance can filter through in ways that aren't helpful. But there's a situation that I've been sent in by one of our listeners. I don't mind your take on it, ladies. There's maybe not similar to your circumstances, Michelle. It's just they feel differently about it. And she's on her second relationship, and all the bills are halved, but she pays the money to her partner each month. And she says it just leaves her feeling like she feels like a tenant. She doesn't feel like she's got a lot of control, because he tells her what half the bills are, she gives them the money, and just there's no transparency there. And I just say that the word she was using is, it makes her feel like a tenant, and she feels really out of control about certain things. So I just wonder what your thoughts on that might be.
I think in terms of, that's when I think the communication comes back, because even though the scenario's probably similar, in that so myself and my husband contribute, I actively want him involved to see what those bills are, what those expenses are, so that he doesn't feel that I'm just plucking a figure out of the air and going, oh yes, this is how much half of it is. And we will now, it's taken us a while to get there, but regularly sit down and have that conversation. So I do think that can be helpful, as you say, the transparency. And then she may not feel that way, because actually she can see where that money's, where it's going and what it's paying for. It's not for him to spend, it's actually providing that roof over your head and the food. So, but again, it all comes back to communication, doesn't it? And maybe being able to maybe have that conversation with him, which may be difficult to start with, but edging in sort of gently and looking at things together.
Yeah.
I've got a friend who does it that way, where he gives her the money and she pays the bills. And I don't think that I could do it that way. We have a joint account, and we put our money in every month into the joint account. And for a time, my husband had lost his joint account card and he hadn't set up the app properly. So he was literally putting his money into an abyss and then getting annoyed with me at the end of the month when I said we'd run out, because he didn't have any visibility over, what things were costing. And also, I think that also, because then there would be a bit of an argument sometimes, oh, you haven't managed it right. Well, I don't know, maybe that's the case, maybe it isn't. But, why should it be on me to be the one managing it? It's our joint expenses. You need to be aware of what things cost. Do you know what a family of 4 costs to feed? It's quite a lot, actually, more than you might think. And
more than my takeaway bill, Emily.
Yeah, probably. Although not quite. But so yeah, I think my point was that I think what happened was that because I would try sometimes and avoid the argument, I would just stick in more money of my own that I couldn't really afford to put in, whereas he was earning more and he could have afforded to put more in, but I just didn't want the argument. But then what happened was he complained so much about not having transparency, and I said, well, it's not my fault that you can apply for another card, you can get yourself set up on the app. And that's what he did, and it's been much better since. So he gets the notifications too, if we're about to go overdrawn or whatever, and then he sometimes now, without me even prodding him, he just puts more money in. So I think, you've got to be careful. If the money is being given to you, is it you that's taking responsibility for any excesses? I mean, it might work to your favor if you can be really savvy and shop in Aldi every week and tell him it's Waitrose, peel off the labels. Then you can take advantage of the surplus. But look, I think we all know it's much better to be transparent and to discuss and communicate about these things.
Yeah. What do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, I think definitely the transparency is key. And even though sort of in my scenario, I take responsibility to pay it all, I think it's really important that, my husband can see what those bills are, where they've come from, why we have them, and I think I even do it with my children. I even, they're at an age now, they're sort of 16, 17, and I even sit down with them and they'll sort of, Mum, can you lend me this? Mum, can you give me this? And I'm like, well, I can, but I don't have, infinite resources. And, maybe this month things are a bit tighter than other months. And I'll actually sit down with them and show them. And as my eldest puts it, I don't like the cost of adulting. I think that's really not fair.
What do I?
But it's just about preparing them for actually when they then, have relationships with people that they know how to deal with the money. Because I think we just generally follow this pattern that our parents may have done, our grandparents may have done, and it doesn't necessarily work. But I do think younger women, and I think I see this more and more, generally share their finances less. So they may have the situation with a joint bills account and then a single, a sole account each as well. So you've got an element of sharing, but also an element of, I've still got my fun money. I've still got my bit that if I want to go and buy my husband a present, I can, or my partner. So I think it's, it is about the transparency. And if the person who has control, so in my scenario, yes, I am responsible, it all comes out of my account, but I have now trying to work towards more of actually my husband being more involved, because if I am in hospital or if I am ill or something happens, it doesn't mean that things won't get paid, because that could make a situation a whole lot worse. And I think it's just really important that that person is fully aware of what it is.
Yeah. I think, having listened to both of you talk, and I've read all the responses that we've had in from listeners, what strikes me is, in shared finances, just by very definition, there are two people involved. And you might be the person that's sitting there going, I don't like it like this. Or you might be the person that's sitting there going, this is just fine. But you don't know what the other person's thinking or feeling. And I guess if people would take one action from today, I think what I would do is encourage them to sit down and think about the way we do money at the moment. What's the one thing I like about it? What's the one thing I'm less keen on? And ask your partner to have the same thought, and then get together and compare. Because it might turn out, if you're not entirely happy, then it might turn out that they're not happy about the same thing, and you can both get what you want. Or even if it is okay, then at least because you've opened the channels of communication, it's going to make it a lot easier further down the road if there are any bumps.
Yeah, I think it's also important to start that conversation, as you say, doing those things on your own and coming from a calm situation. There's nothing worse than trying to talk about finances when something's happened and you're both either, on the defense, or, you're both trying to maybe say it wasn't me. And I think that's the worst place to start a money conversation from. It has to be okay, we're in a nice calm place, and we're in a because otherwise you're not actually arguing again about the money, you're arguing about something else in your relationship, but the money is what's being used as the weapon.
Yeah. It's like I always say, you don't go food shopping when you're hungry.
No.
You don't have conversations about money when a big bill's arrived.
Yeah.
Do you know what would be really interesting? I don't know if anyone will ever do this research, but obviously we know that the rate of divorces and separations during the COVID period has really peaked. And it'd be interesting to know what's been the cause of that. Because, I mean, when people haven't been able to work and are not earning as much, that puts massive stress on a relationship, doesn't it?
Well, I think that's the whole reason we started the Women in Money Cafe.
Yeah.
It was because of lockdown and the financial pressures people might find themselves under. Yeah, no, it's a good point. There will be research out there. All right.
Yeah. We're doing just a little plug. Should we do a little plug for a future episode? We're doing a prenup discussion, aren't we, in a few weeks?
Oh yeah, stay tuned. Episode something or other.
Yeah.
I'll put the number in the show notes coming. We've got the lovely Lisa, who's a solicitor, who's come to talk to us about prenups.
Yeah.
Tune in for that actually. So it's going to give you some tips on how to start having these money conversations if they feel just a tiny bit awkward.
Yeah, but one thing I would say, just to put it out there for anyone who's sort of like 5 years into a marriage that might not be working, is, I believe, we'll get Lisa to confirm this, I don't want to give you the wrong advice, but 6 years is the period of time that your marriage or relationship is deemed to be long term, and there's all sorts of rights that accrue at that 6 year point. And I know this because my sister had a husband who
past tense there, I noticed.
had a husband, and funnily enough was with her for 6 years, and then I think he did his research. But yeah, anyway, just putting it out there.
All right, well that's a bit of a teaser for a future episode, isn't it? All right, have we got anything else we want to add to this subject? I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, I would just say, we talked before about money coaches or financial coaches. And I think I'd just say that if anyone is struggling to have these conversations with their partners, I think maybe that's a good place to go. If you could have a couple of joint coaching sessions. I know you guys do it, and Catherine is very good at dealing with the blended families as well. I
tell you what I shall do. I shall stick in the show notes a link to a little PDF document I've got, which is 4 tips on how to start a conversation about money with your partner. That might be helpful, mightn't it?
Yeah.
I will stick that in the show notes, folks. But I think, is that everything for today?
I think so. I think we've covered most of the areas, haven't we?
All right, expertly done by Michelle. So thank you very much.
We haven't talked about the practicalities, but I guess we weren't intending to so much.
Oh, we
It's
can
more
come
about,
back to that.
but yeah,
We'll
it's
come
more
back to
the
that.
emotions behind it. Yeah, one step at a time.
Yeah, baby steps, baby
Baby
steps.
steps.
All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much for joining us.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.